Welcome to a special Branching Out, Growing Together offshoot episode. These episodes take us beyond our usual format, whether it's a personal reflection, a unique story, or a deep dive with a guest outside our scheduled interviews. And now, here's your host, Melanie Jones.
The Messy Middle of Chestnuts. I've been reading The Messy Middle by Scott Belsky, and it's been sitting with me in a really quiet but persistent way. Not like one of those books that's trying to pump you up or tell you to hustle harder, but the kind that names something you're already living and suddenly helps it make sense. The messy middle, as Belsky describes it, isn't the exciting beginning where everything feels possible, and it's not the polished success story we love to tell in hindsight. It's that long stretch in between where you're doing real work, effort is high, decisions matter, and yet clarity comes slowly and results lag behind the choices you're making. As I was reading, it hit me that this is exactly where the U.S. chestnut community is right now. Not just on chestnut farms across the country, not just within the chestnut growers of America, and not just in the work we're doing at United Chestnuts. Collectively across our chestnut farms, we're past the phase of asking whether chestnuts can work here at all. But we're not yet at a point where standards are fully established, systems feel settled, or outcomes are predictable. We're building orchards while still learning how to manage them, making long-term decisions without the benefit of decades of local hindsight, and planting trees knowing the full story won't reveal itself for years. That, to me, is the messy middle. Across chestnut farms, this middle shows up in very practical, very human ways. It looks like pulling tree tubes and realizing pruning needs to happen sooner than expected, or watching pest pressure build and having to decide not just if you should spray, but when and how, knowing that timing can matter just as much as the product itself. It shows up when you're making infrastructure decisions that feel early in the moment until suddenly they don't, and when harvest expectations meet real-world yields, and you start to understand what those numbers actually mean for the future of the orchard. And it shows up in sales and marketing, too, as you're figuring out how to talk about chestnuts, who the customer really is, and how to build demand at the same time you're still growing the crop. These moments aren't failures, they're feedback. And I think a lot of growers need to hear that more than once, because it's easy, especially in perennial systems, to assume you're behind when in reality you're right on time. The messy middle has a way of making progress feel invisible, even when it's happening underneath the surface. That's why we want to start sharing some of these moments more openly through what we're calling messy middle segments. These will be short, sometimes serious, sometimes lighthearted glimpses into real life across working chestnut farms, where not everything is figured out yet, but learning is happening every day. If you want to follow along with those moments, you can sign up at unitedchestnuts.com/resources to receive messy middle segments, field notes, behind-the-scenes updates, and access to our United Chestnuts blog, where we share deeper reflections, practical insights, and stories from growers across the country as they're released. I also wanted to share this as an offshoot episode because I know how isolating this phase can feel, especially when you're working with long-term systems, and most of the feedback you're getting comes from your own land and your own questions. Sometimes it really helps just to hear someone say, yes, this part is real, and no, you're not doing it wrong. One of the reasons the messy middle can feel uncomfortable is because it doesn't come with clean benchmarks. You're doing important work, but you don't yet have the benefit of hindsight to tell you how it all turns out. That's where it helps to look at other perennial crop industries that have already walked this path. The U.S. pistachio industry is a great example. Although pistachios were introduced to California much earlier, meaningful commercial momentum didn't really begin until the 1970s. From the 1970s through the 1990s, growers worked through what was very much a messy middle of their own, navigating variety selection, orchard spacing, irrigation systems, pest and disease management, mechanical harvesting, and the slow work of building consumer awareness and markets. Sounds very familiar to the chestnut growing community, doesn't it? There was no overnight success, just decades of trial, adjustment, and commitment to getting the systems right. And today, that patient work has paid off. In strong production years, the U.S. pistachio industry now produces well over 1 billion pounds annually, with California serving as the global center of supply. That scale didn't arrive because anyone rushed the middle. It arrived because growers stayed in it long enough to learn what worked. When we look at chestnuts through that lens, the parallels are hard to ignore. Chestnuts today are no longer a novelty, but they're also not yet a fully standardized, widely understood crop in the U.S. We're somewhere in between, defining best practices, testing systems, building markets, and learning where patience matters most. What feels different now, and honestly encouraging, is that growers aren't walking through this middle alone. At the Chestnut Growers of America, new board members and voices are being added with the goal of bringing more relevance, more resources, and more practical support to growers who are right here in the middle. And at the same time, United Chestnuts is very much in its own messy middle, intentionally working to become connective tissue between growers and consumers, while elevating the visibility of chestnuts across the U.S. in a modern, accessible way. That work isn't flashy and it isn't finished. It's about translation, alignment, and trust. It's about helping growers feel seen, helping consumers understand why chestnuts matter, and helping this crop take up the space it deserves in conversations about food, land, and long-term value. Between a modernizing CGA and United Chestnuts education and field-tested learning and development resources, there is more support coming online for people planting chestnut trees today than there was even a few years ago. And that matters because perennial crops don't just need good trees, they need good information, shared expectations, and a community that's willing to learn together. This phase still asks something of growers. It asks for long-term thinking, calm decision-making, a willingness to learn in public, and trust that collaboration matters more than certainty. But it no longer asks you to figure everything out on your own. If you're early in your journey or just chestnut curious, you might find value starting at unitedchestnuts.com/resources. If you're already growing, experimenting, or looking to plug into the broader industry, chestnutgrowers.org is there to support you. Join one or both, depending on where you are right now. At United Chestnuts, we don't see the messy middle as a problem to solve quickly. We see it as a phase to move through thoughtfully. Messy in the middle isn't a slogan for us. It's a lens one will use intentionally and honestly to normalize this season instead of rushing past it. Because if the pistachio industry taught us anything, it's this: the middle is where the future is built. And right now, that's exactly where we are together.